And so I really want to just sort of speak to, what we may all be experiencing at this time, specifically given the complication of the COVID and the coronavirus, but also just coming out of Ramadan, right? And so I think the context is that during the month of Ramadan, I think we've generated a lot of momentum. And there's been a lot of opportunity for us to really turn back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to do ibadat, to worship Him, to do siyam and qiyam and tilawah of the Quran. All of these wonderful things that we've been able to engage. But then the question is, where do we go from here? And I think that transition is a very important one. And Ramadan is a great blessing for us in that it provides us that yearly opportunity to really recharge, to turn back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to generate the momentum towards what we were really here for, what we're created for. وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ, for the ma'rifah of Allah, for the knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to turn back to Him, to recognize Him. And so I want to speak to just some points that might allow us to really do something with that, inshallah. There is, some of the Muslim jurists kind of Muslim scholars kind of break up the human being into two components. They say we have the jasad, right, and we have the ruh, right? We have the body, and then we have the spirit. And the body was created from what? It was created from the earth, right? It was created from, and therefore what it needs for nourishment, right, is earthly things. It needs sleep. It needs food, right? It needs socialization. It needs these sorts of things. But the ruh needs something else. And the ruh, sometimes called by Muslim scholars the latifa rabbaniya, right? That this other part of ourselves, which by the way includes our psyche, right? I'm not talking about just the brain. I'm talking about our psyche, our meaning-making structures. How do we understand ourselves? How do we make sense of the world, right? This is a metaphysical. You can't measure and take out your identity, right? You can't take out, yes, we might be able to localize certain parts of your personality, places in the brain, but that doesn't speak to why you do something or why that personality exists in the first place, right? And so there's that metaphysical part of ourselves, which includes both the psychological and spiritual components. And I really want to speak to some of those things that I think might be helpful for us to enhance our lives going forward. Now that we have the momentum, I mean, they say behavioral psychologists talk about in order to make any significant shift, you have to have sufficient motivation. And Ramadan, alhamdulillah, mashallah, has given us that motivation. And that momentum, what we want to do is we want to carry it forward. So what do we want to do? Number one, I have about 9 points that I want to try to speak to. I'll see however many I can get through, inshallah. Number one is striving for simplicity. Okay? Because, I think one of the things that we're recognizing in modernity is that we have access to so much complexity, so much technological advances, which actually helps us, has facilitated things for us. For example, we can have this, Zoom meeting. You can still tune into your masjid. You can still listen to the tilawah, the Quran. You can listen to things live online. These are great things and tools that we have. We have dishwashers. We have cell phones. You can do your banking online. You can, we have laundry machines and all of that. All of these things to do what? To make our lives, right? They're supposed to make our lives a lot easier, but they provide a degree of complexity, right? They come with complexity. All of these technological advances in modernity introduces complexity into our lives. And we can find, I'm sure all of us can relate to this notion that, despite the fact that we have all these technological advances, common complaint is we don't have enough time for things, right? We're not able to, execute or keep up with all of our demands, right? At the same time as we can tune into the halaqah, we also have to be on conference calls, we have to be answering emails and all of these things. So we find that our lives have also become very complicated, right? Socialization has also become very interesting and complicated. Texting and WhatsApp and Facebook, right? There's all of these other avenues of socialization that has also introduced the degree of complexity into our lives. Some of this complexity, as I said, is useful. But then on the other hand, it's also not very useful in the sense that it produces a lot of scattered brain, right? Meaning that it's hard for us to kind of keep our minds focused on something. This technological kind of world has also kind of sucked us in. And, very interestingly enough, we find that individuals who engage in excessive social media, they tend to have greater degrees of depression, greater degrees of anxiety. It doesn't seem to increase well-being, despite the fact that we have all of these technological advances in the developed world. We are also, studies show, the saddest people in the world. We are also the most anxious people in the world, right? And I think that robs us of some of our very kind of human nature and need for simplicity, right? And so, like, I'll give you an example. The sort of scattered brain that's happening. There's increases in ADHD. Well, let me just make this ADHD, there's a clinical diagnosis of ADHD, but there's also just inattention. And I think I'm also a victim of that, and I'm sure many of you are, that we can't sort of sit still and focus. I mean, perhaps it's hard to focus on a half an hour, 45-minute talk too, right, that I'm giving you. Perhaps throughout the course of this talk, your mind is going to start to wander on different things. We can't really read a book, and actually it's impacting our children as well, right? There's sort of epidemic levels of ADHD that's starting to happen. But I'm chalking this up to really inattention, right? Because what happens is that, when you read a book, what is it that's required of you? When you read a book, you have to create images in your mind, which creates a degree of creativity, right? Of being able to focus internally and keep your mind focused. Whereas we can't compete with the video games, with the TV screens, with all the lights and flashing lights that technology gives us. And therefore, that overstimulation increases the degree of arousal. And so we always have a complaint of feeling understimulated, right? When you read a book, it's not exciting. It's not as exciting as watching a Marvel or Hollywood movie, because all of the flashing lights, all of the overstimulation, different brain areas that it's activating. But what does it do? The counter is that it actually starts to rust away and deteriorate our own internal faculties of being able to be creative, of being able to be, engage in imagination and imagery inside. And then what does that do for us when we go to Salah, for example? When we go into prayer, that we can't keep our minds straight or focused on one thing, that our minds become so scattered, right? That we can't keep and engage a conversation with individuals without our minds leaping and running to different places. And so this creates really an inability, actually. And the analogy I'll give you is like the apple versus the cake, right? If you eat, let's use some culturally relevant, analogies. Let's say a baklava or gulab jamun, right? Whatever your cultural kind of delicacy of sweets that you have. These are highly, saturated sugars, right? And filled with butter. And the degree of stimulation they produce, the amount of serotonin that's released in your brain eating these cheesecakes. I mean, it's like self-medicating, right? I mean, you look at depression and anxiety. Some people that are depressed, they feel satisfied. They don't have any pleasure. They feel sad. So what do? They do comfort eating. They start to eat all of these high sugary foods. And what happens? It gives them kind of an injection, like heroin, of a feel-good experience. And you're trying to kind of balance out this thing that's happening inside. But what happens? It creates a new baseline, okay? That your body, we're adaptive creatures. If you flood the body with all of these things, that becomes its new normal. It becomes its baseline. So take, for example, the cake. And then now, after you eat a gulab jamun, and you eat, an apple after that, how does that apple taste? it doesn't taste all that great. Maybe you need to make it a candy apple, or you dip it in sugar. Take the strawberries and make it a chocolate strawberry, right? Chocolate covered strawberries. And so when we, get accustomed, of course, in moderation, using these things, there's no problem with it. But the issue is that when we become accustomed and we make a lifestyle and we make this our new normal, the baseline, our new normal starts to adapt and adjust, and that's where we stay. And so overstimulation creates this diffusion of mind. And one of the challenges of the COVID scare, right, the COVID kind of coronavirus, yes, in the beginning there was a lot of anxiety about getting sick. And now that we've started to self-quarantine and shelter in place and all lockdowns and all of these things that we're doing, the studies are showing that we're also starting to have an increasing degrees of sadness and anxiety. And what is that? I mean, one of the things is that because we have a difficult time being bored. Okay? What I mean by that is that, again, that overstimulation, we cannot, I mean, you think about, many adolescents have this. You always have to have some music or something going on in the background. And I chalk that up to two problems. One is, it's possible because you want to avoid, right? You want to avoid the thoughts that are in your mind. So you want sort of distract yourself. And what does COVID provide us? It provides us a ripe environment for us to not be able to get away from some of our thoughts. I mean, I do a lot of clinical care, mental health care, right? And I work with a lot of my patients, and they say that they've been struggling, particularly during the COVID, because they're alone with their thoughts. They really don't have the opportunity to distract themselves as much, right? That's one level. The other level, which is probably more familiar to most people, most of us, the average person, right, is that we have a difficult time being bored. That we can't, that we always need some sort of stimulation, and that baseline prevents us from being able to really enjoy the natural things like time with our family, time with our children, time with the Quran and tilawah of the Quran, and mashallah, many people during the month of Ramadan, what they do, and here's sort of the practical part of my talk that I want to not just, cite problems, but actually do some takeaways as to what can we do, is that during the month of Ramadan, what do? We try to unplug a lot more. Hopefully we did. I mean, some of us, if we failed, inshallah, the same Allah is the same Allah that we worshipped in Ramadan outside of it. So inshallah, you have the opportunity to kind of salvage what you missed out on. Don't be too hard on yourself. But what do we want to do is we sort of unplug for a little while during the month of Ramadan. And while we're unplugged, we get an itch. This thing is a poison, right? It's both a blessing and a poison at the same time, this phone. What happens when you take this phone away from somebody for a little while? They start to get itchy, right? I mean, it's almost like crack cocaine, right? Like if you start to go low on your battery, prior to COVID, people will go around looking for a charger. They say, "Hey, do you have a charger? Do you have a charger?" It's like you need an injection. You're going to a drug dealer. Hey, do you have an extra, syringe or something like that? It's like a crackhead, right? And what we end up, we have this this sort of itch that we have. And mashallah, we sort of resist the itch, inshallah. But what happens? If we itch it, it's like the scab. Okay, you have to hold out for long enough. Behavioral psychologists say, if you want to get to a new normal, okay, from your baseline and extinguish this addiction, what you need to do is to actually not itch the scab. What happens when a scab starts to form on your arm? You start to get really itchy. So if you itch it, what will happen? You keep breaking off the scab, and you may eventually get it infected, right? You may get worse each time. And you may develop scars over time because you've had this long-term damage to your skin. And so what we want to do is resist the itch so that we can have healing. But what happens when we come to the end of Ramadan? That itch starts to creep in. And I urge us, including myself, that after Ramadan is done, stop itch. Don't go back to itching. Okay? Create a new lifestyle. This is very natural. Impulse control, right, is like a muscle. We have this rebound effect. When we sort of get hard down upon it, we want to have kind of the rubber band effect, they say, right? Kind of the rebound, snap back into the into the other direction. And so I'll give you an example. There was a study, right, between two individuals, two groups of individuals, and what did they do? One group, there was a psychological study. They took two groups of individuals. They gave one, and then they had a table, right? They had two tables. On one table they had radishes. On the other table they had freshly baked cookies. They took these two groups of people. They took one group and they said, you can eat the radishes, but you're not allowed to touch the cookies. The other group came in and they said, you can eat the cookies as much as you want. Okay? So one group, they were deprived. They had to hold themselves back from eating the cookies. They wanted to eat the cookies. They smelled it, but they weren't able to eat it. They ate the radishes. The other group, they ate the cookies. Now what they did was they took both groups and they gave them a problem-solving activity. Okay? But the problem, you couldn't actually solve it. It was an impossible task. The group that ate the cookies spent a total of 19 minutes trying to solve the problem. The group that ate the radishes spent 9 minutes, 10 minutes less than the group that ate the cookies. What are we saying here? What's the moral? What's the results? What's the outcome? What are they uncovering here? The group that had to hold themselves back, they held themselves back in one environment where they didn't eat the cookies, but then after that, they couldn't hold themselves back from quitting. They couldn't extend themselves any further. Okay? They couldn't kind of bite down on their nafs, the desire to want to quit and enjoy yourself, to embrace the discomfort was waning. And so the analogy I'm making here is for Ramadan. We do have a itch to want to go exactly back to the way that we were living. Now, what I say is develop some degree of moderation. Yes, during the month of Ramadan, we do more ibadah than we do for the entire month, the entire year. That's a given, right? I mean, that's normal. That's something that's healthy. So there's no problem with that. And we're not expecting that you're going to do the exact, if you did, finish one Quran or got to half a Quran or you read one juz a day or you read 5 juz a day. We're not necessarily expecting that you're going to go back to, you're going to do that exactly like that throughout the course of the year. Illa mashallah, except for the few individuals whom Allah has really favored and blessed to do that. But most of us will just return to some degree of normalcy. Here's my suggestion. If your normal was here during the month of Ramadan, okay, and then you pushed yourself, right, to get to a better place up here, okay, don't fall right back. Find somewhere right in between, okay, go a little bit lower. And some of the, my suggestion to us would be the suggestion of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? He would say, there's two ahadith. He says, خُذُوا مِنَ الْأَعْمَالِ مَا تُطِيقُونَ. Do those actions or take from those actions, take on those actions in which you have the capacity to do so. So be realistic with yourself. Say, hey, if I did one juz of Quran every day during the month of Ramadan, I can at least do 3 to 4 pages. Okay? And this is what I'm going to make my new norm. And the Prophet ﷺ says, أَحَبُّ الْأَعْمَالِ إِلَى اللَّهِ أَدْوَمُهَا وَإِنْ قَلَّ. That the most beloved of actions are those that are done consistently, even if they're done in small quantities. So what we take away here from Ramadan is that you may have had large quantities of ibadat, but when you leave Ramadan, take some things away from it. Allow that to be some form of change. Okay? And so don't go back to this need for overstimulation. Now I'm going to kind of turn more towards more of a psychological process. I talked about the behavioral, right? Like what you should do take a little bit and continue and carry on forward. Allow yourself to be bored a lot more. Don't fill your time all the time, right? Allow yourself to contemplate. Allow yourself to sit and appreciate quiet, okay? Stay in the moments a lot more, right? Anxiety and depression have two psychological processes. Imam al-Ghazali, Imam al-Razi, Fakhruddin al-Razi also talk about these two things. They say sadness, which by the way precedes any modern psychological science on this, which also corroborates what they said, right? Today's science corroborates it. Sadness does what? It gets you to think about the past. All of your regrets get lost in what, things in the past. Certainly thinking about memories are useful in so much as it enlivens you, in so much as it does something positive for you. But getting stuck in the past for the sake of being in the past is not beneficial, right? The Prophet ﷺ said that this idea, this whisper of shaitan, لو فعلت كذا وكذا, right? That had I done this, these regrets in the past. He says, don't say that. Say, ما شاء قدر الله ما شاء فعل, right? That Allah willed what has happened in the past. And Imam al-Mawsili, he says, right, who's a Sahib al-Ikhtiyar, a famous Hanafi jurist, he has this nice saying in one of his passages. He says, this is like diya'at al-mawjud li talab al-mafqud. That this is wasting the present in seeking something that's already gone, right? Something that's already finished. So I think we have a difficult time sometimes remaining in the present. That's also part of the scattered mind, right? We also have to clutter our minds with stuff. Having a conversation with somebody, having, Imam Razi, for example, he says another word for the present moment is dhawq. Dhawq. What is the literal meaning of dhawq in Arabic? It's to taste the ladha, the taste of something, right? To appreciate the blessings that we have. And that's the other thing that I wanted to emphasize, is that our appreciation for what we have in the present. Sometimes what happens, the other side of the coin, is anxiety. Anxiety, stress, fear gets us to think about the future. Now, Imam al-Ghazali says that's useful in so much as it allows us to prepare in the present. What is anxiety about? Anxiety is about control. We want to have more control so that we can avert some catastrophe in the future, some bad thing in the future. Like, for example, we don't want to get sick from the COVID. What do? We wear masks, we stay home, we wash our hands, we're careful with our groceries, hand sanitizers, etc. Okay? Now, unhealthy anxiety would be getting on a computer and checking coronavirus every single day, the numbers. And what's going to happen? What are we going to do? Right? These are not healthy for us. This is excessive anxiety. Why? Because we don't control it. So what do? We use our asbab, the things that we control. The things that we do not, what do? We put it in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? This is what tawakkul is. Right? Tawakkul isn't just a concept, but it's actually putting it into practice in our daily lives. One of my teachers, Sheikh Amin, would say, what is Sufism? What is Tasawwuf? It's taking your aqidah, your belief of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and putting it into your daily life. It's putting it into action. So we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides. There's a recession, economic hardships, right? Certainly that's a fear that we have, a worry. It's a very realistic one, right? But we also know وَمَا مِن دَابَّةٍ فِي الْأَرْضِ إِلَّا عَلَى اللَّهِ رِزْقُهَا, that Allah has taken upon himself to ensure the sustenance of the believer. Now the question is, can we let go, have that leap of faith, kind of put ourselves in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And this is what many psychologists are starting to study, and they call this transcendental spiritual experiences, TSEs. You can look it up. And they talk about the incredible power, transformative power of transcendental spiritual experiences. We have this in our tradition, right? So We want to have that ability to be able to really appreciate and do shukr of that which we have in our present, and to have a kind of not scattered brain, is to try to have a focused mind. Tafakkur and muraqabah. Tafakkur and muraqabah are these concepts within the Islamic tradition that gets us to really focus on something. Again, in the present. If we're focusing on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? We're focusing on the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We may sit there and meditate. There's all of this research and work being done on mindfulness. What's the essence of mindfulness? Which is already present within the Islamic tradition in muraqabah, or even more so, is this mindfulness is what? Being able to kind of shut off your mind from all these other things and to keep it focused on one thing. And so we have this in the Quran, tafakkur, right? والذين يذكرون الله قياما وقعودا وعلى جنوبهم ويتفكرون في خلق السماوات والأرض ربنا ما خلقت هذا باطلا. That those individuals in their sitting, walking, laying states, they always can reflect upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And reflect upon, now we have an opportunity upon the خلق السماوات والأرض, like nature. Get out and enjoy. You know, one of the things that we miss as an industrialized, developed nations is the interaction with the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This corona, عسى أن تكرهوا شيئا وهو خير لكم, is perhaps a blessing for us. And it allows us an opportunity to sit alone with ourselves and our families and our thoughts, to be bored and embrace boredom and to gather our thoughts, right? To have more muraqabah and one-mindedness, and also to then appreciate nature. The weather is getting good. There's no problem with going out, inshallah. Of course, keep 6 feet away from individuals, but go out, embrace nature. You know, one of the downfalls of a developed nation is that we're on salaries. Salaries create what? A dependency on the employer. But when individuals are in business, those people who are self-employed, they realize this. When the farmer has to go to his field and the crops may come out or they may not, or they may harvest that season or they may not, or there may be a famine or shortage or rain, right? They make salatul istisqa, they make a dua, they make prayers for what? For rain to come. They're always interacting with nature. They're always able to see the miracles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? These are things that us and our children and our young generation, the millennial generation, doesn't know, doesn't get to experience. And for us to be able to really get out and to have this opportunity, I think is a great opportunity for us. The other thing that I want us to take away into the month of Ramadan, after the month of Ramadan, is what did we do during the month of Ramadan? You know, when somebody starts a fight with you, what do you say? Say, Inni Sa'im, I'm fasting. You don't want to fight. What do? Speak good. You don't want to complain, right? If you are, at iftar, you want to, of course, this is going, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu la tubtilu sadaqatikum bil manni wal adha. Don't destroy your sadaqah and your good deeds with what? Complaints, insults, by saying, I did this for you or I did that for you. So in our relationships, actually, what we say has a huge impact on the way that we actually feel. Psychologists talk about this notion of speaking good into existence. What do we mean? So training, there's a whole science in positive psychology and learned optimism. Many of us, unfortunately, throughout the course of the year, we have what we call a negative attribution bias. That's what psychologists call it. It's a shift to the negative. Everything the cup is always half empty. And for us to be able to appreciate the good is very important. Don't speak complaints into reality. Don't think evil of people. Don't think evil thoughts. Think about the positive. Try to train your minds, train ourselves to work towards a positive. Don't work with a deficit lens. Work with a positive lens. What do I mean by the deficit lens? Oh, like the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ says, don't look in the dunya at people that have more than you. Look at people that have less than you. This is what called psychological reframing or shifting your attention, right? We start to focus on individuals who have less than us. So don't complain. When we complain, we speak things into existence. Try to withhold this tongue. من كان يؤمن بالله واليوم الآخر فليقل خيرا أو ليصمت. That whomsoever fears Allah and the last day, they shall speak good or stay silent. This is absolutely golden. Because when you complain, you speak things into existence. By the way, healthy couples, marital research shows that healthy couples are not those individuals that don't have problems, but healthy couples are those individuals who have problems. However, they're able to overwhelm and have a greater proportion and degree of positive thoughts and statements towards their spouses than those who don't have, than those who are unhappy. What does that mean? That they're able to think positive. What is shaitan? It's an Eid. At the end of Ramadan is an Eid for us. It's also an Eid for shaitan. He is an ex-con, right? He comes out of jail. And he's angry at the world, right, for putting him in jail. And he's angry for being in jail. And now he's ready to unleash his shar. And what does shaitan do? الشيطان يعيدكم الفقر ويأمركم بالفحشاء. Right? Allah does, what does he do? He gets you to engage in evil. He gets you to think that you're going to be poor. So what do we do when we think we're going to be poor? We are selfish. We start to withhold. What do positive psychologists say about the most happiest people? Positive psychology shows that the happiest people are the individuals who are the most selfless. There's two types of happiness, by the way, that research is showing. There's the pleasure seeking, and there's satisfaction. Okay? Pleasure, right? It does not bring you joy. In fact, it can create a lack of resilience. And science shows that the people who are more materialistic tend to have greater anxiety and depression. But people who lead a meaningful life, who strive to live for some meaning that's above themselves, and ironically enough, in a secular psychology, they say that if you are selfless and you do for others, for what? For goodness sake, right? For your own sake, you will actually feel better. I mean, we say obviously that's shallow, that's secular, right? We say don't do for goodness sake, do for God's sake, do for Allah's sake, right? لا يضيع إن الله لا يضيع أجر المحسنين, right? That Allah does not waste your good deeds. ولا تستوي الحسنة ولا السيئة ادفع بالتي هي أحسن فإذا الذي بينك وبينه عداوة كأنه ولي حميم. We see this in the Quran, that evil and good are not the same. So return evil with good. Return, right? أحسنوا إلى من أساء إليك. Right? The Prophet ﷺ said, do good to the one that does bad to you. Your spouse is upset with you. You return it with a kind word. Return it with kindness. Or don't say anything at all. من كان يؤمن بالله واليوم الآخر فليقل خيرا أو ليصمت. You have food iftar, your very last iftar. If you don't like something on the table, either don't say anything or say mashallah. This is amazing. Thank you very much. Jazakallah khair. Right? And appreciation and gratitude is actually one of the things that brings a lot of satisfaction in life, psychologically. And they say, right? And so this is, and the Quran says, right, فَأَمَّا بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ فَحَدِّثْ. Right? إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُحِبُّ أَن يَرَى أَثْرَ نِعْمَتِهِ عَلَى عَبْدِهِ. Right? أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. That Allah loves to see that people speak of His bounties. They don't attribute it to themselves. They say, MashaAllah, Alhamdulillah, Allah gave me this. This gratitude, this constancy in speaking khair, in thinking khair, is in being able to not dissociate and go into all of these pleasure-seeking activities is going to make you more what? It will make you satisfied with life. A lot of research is on life satisfaction. And they show that people that have a lot more, they're not necessarily satisfied with life. To the contrary, people that make more money beyond what is necessary, beyond comforts, they end up actually having greater degrees of anxiety and depression. And so what do we want to do? We want to be able to suffice with a lot less. I'm not saying don't have any pleasure at all. Because after Ramadan, again, we're not going to go to the other extreme. What I'm saying is be realistic with yourself. Here, a very tangible advice that I can give you. Take your phone when you come home or a set time, turn it off or put it away. Then set a time for yourself. 1 hour in the day. You're going to binge on your phone. Go crazy. Answer your emails, your messages, whatever. But do not allow it to have ghalaba over you. Do not allow it to be your master. Right? What is the Prophet ﷺ said? Al-ajizu man atba'a nafsahu hawahu wa tamanna ala Allah. What does he do? And Imam al-Ghazali says this person is a ahmaq person. That this is a foolish person. That the person who is actually an ajiz, incapacitated, is the person who makes himself follow their base carnal desires, pleasure seeking. And then what do? They say, oh, inshallah, Allah will have mercy upon me. Allah will forgive me. Good things will happen to me. But how will good things happen to you if you don't work on that? Right? And so, and the ajiz, actually the word interesting, right, is ajiz, that you are actually incapacitated because your nafs rides you, like the horse analogy. The horse rides you. You don't ride the horse. I don't know, for those, I was telling my children about the Mullah Nasruddin jokes, Mullah Nasruddin, he had a donkey. And he would ride with, and he was riding his donkey with his son standing next to him. So, then he passes by a village and people say, oh, look at this guy. His son is walking and the Mullah Nasruddin, he's such a inconsiderate father. He's making the young son walk while he's on the donkey. Then what he does is he flips it. Okay, fine. Then he switches, puts the son on. Then he goes into a village. They criticize him. They say, oh, why is the son riding? The father is walking. And then they both get on. And then they say, oh, why is both people, they're sitting on this donkey. They're going to break the donkey's back. Don't they have any consideration for the donkey? So eventually what he does a foolish thing. He takes the donkey and he puts the donkey on his back. The donkey starts to ride him. Right? And so this is the foolish thing, is that we want to ride our beast. We want to be in control. And so we want to take these mechanisms of being able to do such things that will allow us to be able to conquer our nafs and to strive towards meaningful existence. We are searching for satisfaction. And so these are my few advices. My last one that I want to mention, because I think is a good one, is that we have to anticipate lethargy. Okay? People think that to be motivated means that we'll always be motivated. So don't follow your feeling states. What I mean by that is that sometimes you feel lazy. You get up in the morning, you're feeling lazy. Okay? But if you give way to that laziness, you go to bed, you stay in bed, you don't get up, and you give power to that laziness, it will grow. Right? And what do they say? Psychologists say you have to interrupt it. So get up. As soon as you start to feel lazy, you're generating a momentum of laziness. The irony is that energy creates more energy. Energy begets more energy. Once you get up, and one psychological mechanism to do this is to give yourself a very small goal. You say, okay, look, I'm supposed to read one juz today. You know what? I'm just going to read one page. I'm feeling really tired today. At least one page. I'm not going to let go of this amal. Once you start, you realize that maybe you're going to do half the juz. Or you want to get cleaning up in the house and you feel lazy. You say, okay, you know what? I'm just going to clean for 5 minutes, just do a quick tidy. Once you get started, you might actually get rolling. Don't give yourself that gap of time for shaitan to take over, for your laziness to take over, for your evil thoughts to take over. We want to interrupt it. And so I conclude with the fact that, with the idea that this is not an easy process, right? Meaning that it's easier said than done. Yes, Dr. Hooman, you can come up here and say all of these things. Maulana Shakir, you can preach on the minbar, but it's easier said than done. You guys maybe can do it easily. By the way, I can't do it easily. Maybe Maulana Shakir can, but it is definitely a struggle. And I don't want to minimize the fact that it is absolutely a struggle. But what you need to do is to shift. So I'll give the analogy typically to my patients that, if you don't balance your car wheels, what happens? You start to tip towards one direction. So if you're tipping towards negativity all the time, what do you have to do to strive towards equilibrium? Push yourself to the other direction. Push yourself. Eventually what will happen? You'll straighten out. And you'll be where you want to be. And obviously you always want to keep a watchful eye on yourself so that you don't go towards any of these extremes. And those are my advices for today. I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the tawfiq to act upon that which I said, which is khair and good and meaningful, and for Allah to forgive me for that which I have said, which is from that is evil and shar and not in accordance with the rida of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.